The making of a legend, Michael Jackson's early years, and the birth of the Jackson 5 before he became the king of pop, before the moonwalk, before Thriller, and before he changed music forever. Michael Jackson was just a child with an extraordinary gift. His story did not begin with fame and fortune. It began in a small house in Gary, Indiana, where a young boy with a voice unlike any other was about to take his first steps toward becoming the biggest superstar the world has ever seen. But his journey to the top was not easy. From a childhood of strict discipline and relentless rehearsals to his breakthrough as the lead singer of the Jackson 5, Michael Jackson's early years were filled with incredible talent, struggle, and an unstoppable drive for success. This is the story of how a poor boy from Indiana became a global sensation before he was even a teenager. A child prodigy is born. Michael Joseph Jackson was born on the 29th of August, 1958, in Gary, Indiana. He was the seventh of 9 children in the Jackson family, growing up in a tiny 2-bedroom house with his brothers and sisters. His parents, Joseph, Joe Jackson, and Catherine Jackson, were hardworking but strict and demanding. His father, Joe Jackson, worked in a steel mill but had big dreams of turning his children into music stars. His mother, Catherine Jackson, was a devout Jehovah's Witness and played a major role in shaping Michael's moral and spiritual beliefs. From a young age, music was everywhere in the Jackson household. Joe played the guitar, and the children grew up listening to artists like James Brown, The Temptations, and Jackie Wilson. The Jackson brothers would sing and dance together, developing their talent in the small living room of their tiny home. But no one expected that the youngest of them, Michael, would become the greatest performer of all time. Joe Jackson, a father or a tyrant? Joe Jackson was not an easy man. He was ruthless, demanding, and had zero tolerance for mistakes. As soon as he realized that his children had musical talent, he turned them into a disciplined rehearsing machine. The boys would practice for hours every single day, repeating the same songs and dance moves until they were perfect. If they made mistakes, Joe would punish them harshly, sometimes with a belt, sometimes with psychological pressure. He pushed them beyond their limits, refusing to let them be ordinary children. Michael later revealed in interviews that his father was physically and emotionally abusive. He'd sit in a chair with a belt in his hand and watch us rehearse. If you messed up, you get it. But there was a dark irony to this strict upbringing, because while Joe Jackson's methods were brutal, they were also highly effective. The Jackson Boys became one of the tightest, most polished young music groups in America, and Michael, despite being the youngest, was already stealing the show. The rise of the Jackson 5, Michael steals the spotlight. By the time Michael was 5 years old, he was already performing with his older brothers in talent shows and small clubs. His brothers Jermaine, Tito, Jackie, and Marlon originally formed the group, but when Michael joined, everything changed. His voice was unbelievably mature for his age, full of emotion, power, and soul. His natural charisma and stage presence made him the star of the group. Even though he was the youngest, the Jackson 5 began performing in bigger venues, gaining attention in Chicago and Detroit. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 1968, they auditioned for Motown Records, the biggest record label in black music at the time. And when Berry Gordy, the legendary founder of Motown, saw Michael perform, he immediately knew this kid was a star. The moment he opened his mouth, I knew he had something special. Michael had a gift. Within months, the Jackson 5 signed a contract with Motown, and their journey to superstardom officially began. The breakthrough, #1 hits, and superstardom. In 1969, the Jackson 5 released their first single, I Want You Back. It was an instant smash hit, reaching #1 on the Billboard charts. Suddenly, the Jackson 5 were everywhere. They appeared on television shows like The Ed Sullivan Show. They went on tour, performing in sold-out arenas across the country. Their next 3 singles, ABC, The Love You Saved, and I'll Be There, also hit #1, making them one of the biggest acts in America. And through it all, one thing became clear: Michael Jackson was the real star. His dancing was electric, with moves inspired by James Brown. His voice was filled with raw emotion, making people feel every lyric. His charisma on stage was magnetic, drawing in audiences of all ages. At just 11 years old, Michael Jackson was already a superstar. But while the world saw a young boy living his dream, behind the scenes, his life was far from perfect. Because Michael Jackson never truly had a childhood. The lost childhood, fame at a cost, while other kids were playing outside, going to school dances, and living normal lives, Michael was working, performing, and constantly rehearsing. He spent his days in recording studios, cutting new tracks. His nights were spent on stage, under the bright lights, entertaining millions. He had no time for friends, school events, or just being a kid. Later in life, Michael would describe this time as deeply painful. I remember seeing kids playing outside, and I would just cry. I wanted that life, but it was never mine. Despite the glitz and glamour, his childhood was stolen by fame. And while millions adored him, he was already beginning to feel lonely, trapped, and deeply misunderstood. Because even though he was on top of the world, Michael wanted more. He loved his brothers, but he did not want to be just part of a group. He dreamed of something even bigger. And soon he would make a decision that would change the course of music history forever. Coming up next, Michael Jackson goes solo, the rise of a legend. By the late 1970s, Michael Jackson had outgrown the Jackson 5. He wanted creative control over his music. He wanted to break free from Motown's strict rules. He wanted to prove that he was more than just a child star. And so he made the boldest move of his career. He went solo. But could he succeed without his brothers? Was the world ready for Michael Jackson, the solo artist? In the next chapter, we explore his groundbreaking album, Off the Wall, his partnership with Quincy Jones, and the moment he officially became the king of pop. Get ready, the true rise of Michael Jackson is about to begin.
The birth of a superstar, Michael Jackson goes solo and changes music forever. By the late 1970s, Michael Jackson had outgrown the Jackson 5. He had spent his entire childhood performing, following orders, and being part of a group. But deep inside, he knew he was destined for something bigger. He wanted creative control. He wanted to break free from Motown's restrictions. He wanted to be more than just a child star. And so he made a decision that would change music history forever. He went solo. But could Michael Jackson succeed without his brothers? Was the world ready for Michael Jackson, the solo artist? What happened next would shock the industry and prove that Michael Jackson was not just another singer. He was a revolution waiting to happen. The Motown breakup, escaping the past. Michael loved Motown Records, but by the late 1970s, it had become a prison for his creativity. Motown controlled every aspect of the Jackson 5's music. The group was forced to record songs written by Motown producers, leaving them with no artistic freedom. Michael was growing frustrated, feeling like he was trapped in a box. He wanted to experiment with new sounds, explore different genres, and break away from the bubblegum pop image that had defined his childhood. And so in 1975, the Jackson 5 left Motown and signed with Epic Records, where Michael was promised more creative control. At first, he still worked with his brothers, but he knew that his future lay in becoming a solo artist. The only question was, could he do it? The off-the-wall era, Michael Jackson proves himself. Michael's first real solo album, Off the Wall, was released in 1979. This was not just another album, it was his declaration of independence. It was the first time he had creative control over his music. He teamed up with legendary producer Quincy Jones, who would become his greatest collaborator. He fused pop, R&B, funk, and disco into a sound that was fresh, modern, and impossible to ignore. The album was a massive success, selling over 20 million copies worldwide. The breakout hits Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, a high-energy disco anthem that won Michael his first Grammy Award. Rock With You, a smooth R&B classic that became one of his most beloved songs. Off the Wall, a funky, feel-good track that set the stage for his unique sound. For the first time, Michael Jackson was not just a former child star, was a solo megastar. But he was not satisfied. Because while Off the Wall was a massive success, it did not win the Grammy for Album of the Year. Michael felt betrayed, believing that the music industry still did not take him seriously. And so he made a vow: my next album will be the biggest album of all time. What came next was more than just an album, it was a cultural explosion that would make him the most famous person on the planet. Coming up next, the Thriller era, when Michael Jackson took over the world. After Off the Wall, Michael Jackson was already a superstar. But with his next album, he would become a global icon. He would release the best-selling album in history. He would create the most famous music video ever made. He would perform a dance move that would change pop culture forever.
Thriller, the moment Michael Jackson took over the world. By 1982, Michael Jackson had already proven himself as a solo artist with Off the Wall. He had #1 hits. He had won his first Grammy. He had redefined pop and R&B music. But for Michael, that was not enough. He did not just want to be a superstar, he wanted to be the biggest artist in history. And to do that, he needed to create something the world had never seen before. So he locked himself in the studio with producer Quincy Jones and started working on an album that would not just break records, it would shatter them forever. That album was Thriller. And when it was released, it did not just make Michael Jackson famous, it made him the most iconic artist of all time. The making of Thriller, perfection or nothing. Michael was a perfectionist. He refused to settle for anything less than greatness, and in the studio, he pushed himself harder than ever before. He and Quincy Jones recorded over 30 songs, but only 9 made it onto the album. Why? Because Michael wanted every single song to be a hit. And that is exactly what happened. Thriller, the album that changed everything, on the 30th of November 1982, Thriller was released. And the world was never the same again. The album was an instant hit, selling 1 million copies per week at its peak. The record-breaking hits, Billie Jean, a hypnotic track with an unforgettable bass line becoming one of the most famous songs of all time. Beat It, a rock-inspired anthem featuring a legendary guitar solo by Eddie Van Halen. Thriller, a horror-inspired masterpiece with the greatest music video ever made. Thriller stayed at #1 on the Billboard charts for 37 weeks, making it the best-selling album in history with over 70 million copies sold worldwide. But Thriller was not just about music, it was about changing pop culture forever. The Motown 25 performance, the night Michael became a legend. On the 25th of March, 1983, Michael Jackson performed at Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, Forever. And during his performance of Billie Jean, he introduced something that the world had never seen before. The moonwalk. The moment Michael glided backward across the stage, time stopped. The audience screamed in disbelief. People replayed the performance over and over. Every kid in America tried to copy the move. It was the moment when Michael Jackson was no longer just a musician, he was a phenomenon. And yet, he still had one more trick up his sleeve. Because in 1983, he was about to release the most famous music video ever made. Coming up next, the Thriller music video, the video that redefined entertainment, a 14-minute horror movie disguised as a music video. The most expensive and ambitious music video ever made. The moment Michael Jackson became the king of pop forever. Thriller, the music video that changed everything. By 1983, Michael Jackson was already the biggest pop star on the planet. His album Thriller was breaking every record in the music industry. His Motown 25 performance had made the moonwalk an international sensation. But Michael was not satisfied. He wanted to do something that had never been done before. And that is when he came up with an idea that would redefine the music industry forever. He would turn a music video into a cinematic masterpiece. That music video was Thriller. And when it was released, it did not just change Michael Jackson's career, it changed the entire entertainment industry. The vision, a music video like no other. Before Thriller, music videos were simple, promotional tools artists would stand in front of a camera, lip sync to their songs, and maybe dance a little. But Michael had a different vision. He wanted to create a mini movie. He wanted a story, special effects, and professional actors. He wanted to make something that people would never forget. So he hired John Landis, the director of An American Werewolf in London, to bring his idea to life. Together, they created a 14-minute horror-themed music video, unlike anything the world had ever seen. The making of Thriller, Hollywood-level production. Thriller was the most expensive music video ever made at the time, costing $500,000, an unheard of amount for a music video in 1983. The makeup and special effects took hours to apply. Michael spent weeks learning the intricate zombie choreography. The entire production was filmed like a Hollywood blockbuster. The result? A terrifying, mesmerizing, and unforgettable experience, the premiere. The night the world stopped. When Thriller premiered on the 2nd of December, 1983, it was an instant cultural phenomenon. MTV aired it in prime time, treating it like a major movie release. It became the most played music video in MTV history. People lined up in movie theaters just to watch it. It was more than just a music video, it was an event. The iconic moments, Michael's chilling transformation into a werewolf, the legendary zombie dance sequence, Vincent Price's haunting voiceover. Everything about Thriller became legendary, and its impact still lasts to this day. The legacy, how Thriller changed everything. Thriller revolutionized the music industry. It elevated music videos from simple promotional tools to artistic masterpieces. It made MTV the most important music platform in the world. It cemented Michael Jackson's status as the undisputed king of pop. To this day, Thriller remains the most famous music video of all time. And it was just the beginning. Because Michael Jackson was about to reach heights of fame and controversy that no one had ever seen before. Coming up next, the height of fame, when Michael Jackson became the most famous person on earth. After Thriller, Michael Jackson was no longer just a musician, he was a global phenomenon. But with extreme fame came extreme pressure, scrutiny, and controversy. In the next chapter, we explore his record-breaking world tours, his superstar friendships with legends like Prince and Madonna, the beginning of the rumors and scandals that would haunt him for the rest of his life, the height of fame, when Michael Jackson became the most famous person on earth. By the mid-1980s, Michael Jackson was no longer just a pop star. He was the most famous person on the planet. Thriller had sold millions of copies, making it the best-selling album of all time. His music videos were events, breaking records and setting new standards for the industry. His moonwalk was now legendary, inspiring an entire generation. But fame on this level came with a price. Michael was not just admired, was obsessed over, scrutinized, and relentlessly followed by the media. His life became a never-ending spectacle. And as much as he loved his fans, he was beginning to feel trapped by his own success. This is the story of how Michael Jackson reached the peak of his career, but also how the pressure of being the biggest star in the world began to change him forever. The bad era, bigger, bolder, and darker. After Thriller, Michael had one goal to prove that he could do it again. He was not satisfied with just being the king of pop. He wanted to push the boundaries even further. And so in 1987, he released Bad, an album that would take his success to even greater heights. The new Michael tougher and more aggressive. With Bad, Michael transformed his image. He traded his soft, youthful look for a tougher, edgier persona. His music videos featured more intense choreography and storytelling. He wore black leather, buckles, and a rebellious attitude. The album produced a record-breaking 5 #1 hits, including Bad, a song that showcased his new attitude, The Way You Make Me Feel. A smooth, flirtatious track, Man in the Mirror, a powerful song about self-reflection and change. Dirty Diana, a rock-inspired anthem about the dark side of fame. Smooth Criminal, one of his most iconic and cinematic music videos. The Bad Tour became the highest-grossing tour of all time, proving that Michael was still untouchable. But behind the scenes, he was struggling with his own identity. The beginning of the rumors, a life under the microscope. As Michael's fame grew, so did the world's obsession with his personal life. Suddenly, the media was not just interested in his music, they wanted to know everything about him. And when they could not find answers, they made up their own story. The changing appearance. Fans noticed that Michael's skin was getting lighter. Some accused him of bleaching his skin. Others speculated he was ashamed of being black. The tabloids ran wild rumors, calling him Wacko Jacko. But the truth was much deeper. Michael had vitiligo, a rare skin condition that causes patches of skin to lose pigmentation. Later in life, his autopsy confirmed he had the disease, but the damage had already been done. The world believed he was hiding something. Neverland, escaping reality. Feeling trapped by fame, Michael built Neverland Ranch, a fantasy paradise where he could feel like a child again. It had a zoo, amusement park rides, and a giant mansion. He surrounded himself with animals, statues, and fairy tale decorations. He invited children to visit, offering them a place to play and escape their own struggles. To Michael, Neverland was his safe space. To the media, it was strange, suspicious, and the beginning of controversy. Because soon people would question his relationships with children, and his dream of Neverland would turn into a nightmare. Coming up next, the dangerous era, scandals, Louisiana Woods, and a fall from grace. Michael was still on top of the world, but cracks were beginning to show. Allegations would surface, questioning his personal life. His health and appearance would continue to change. The media would turn against him like never before. The dangerous era, scandals, lawsuits, and a fall from grace. By the early 1990s, Michael Jackson was still the most famous entertainer on the planet. His Dangerous album had produced massive hits like Black or White and Remember the Time. His music videos were bigger and more cinematic than ever. His Heal the World Foundation showed that he was using his fame to help children and promote global change. But behind the scenes, his life was spiraling out of control, because this was the era when Michael Jackson went from being the most admired man in music to one of the most controversial figures in the world. The rumors, accusations, and legal battles that followed would permanently damage his career and leave him fighting for his reputation for the rest of his life. This is the story of how everything started to fall apart. The first allegations, the moment everything changed. In 1993, Michael Jackson was accused of something that shocked the world. A 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler and his father, Evan Chandler, accused Michael of child sexual abuse. For years, Michael had been surrounded by children. He invited them to Neverland for amusement park rides, games, and fun. He often spoke about his love for children, saying he related to them more than adults. He admitted that he sometimes slept in the same room with children, but he insisted it was purely innocent. But when the Chandler family made their accusations, the world erupted into controversy. The investigation, the police raided Neverland Ranch, searching for evidence. Tabloids ran wild, publishing shocking and unverified rumors. Michael was humiliated and devastated, denying everything in a tearful television interview. I am totally innocent of any wrongdoing. I would never harm a child. The truth will come out. But before the case went to trial, something unexpected happened. Michael Jackson settled the lawsuit out of court for $23 million. His fans believe he was innocent and only settled to avoid the media circus. His critics saw it as an admission of guilt. And from that moment on, Michael Jackson's reputation was forever changed. The marriage to Lisa Marie Presley, love or damage control? Just 1 year after the allegations, Michael shocked the world again. He married Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of Elvis Presley. The marriage was announced in 1994 in what many saw as a desperate attempt to fix his public image. Lisa Marie defended Michael, insisting he was a kind, loving man who was misunderstood. The two appeared in a controversial kiss at the MTV Video Music Awards, trying to convince the world that their love was real. But despite their efforts, the public did not believe it. Many thought the marriage was a publicity stunt. Their chemistry seemed awkward and forced. Just 2 years later, in 1996, they divorced. To this day, people still debate whether their marriage was real love or just an orchestrated PR move. But while his personal life was a media circus, Michael was still trying to focus on his music. And soon, he would release one of the most personal and controversial albums of his career, his struggle with fame. The History album. In 1995, Michael Jackson released his story, Past, Present, and Future, Book 1. This was not just an album, it was a statement to the world. It featured new songs mixed with his greatest hits. It was Michael's response to the accusations, rumors, and media attacks. The lyrics in songs like Scream and They Don't Care About Us were filled with anger and frustration. Tired of you telling your lies. You're all I despise. Scream. You know, I really do hate to say it. The government don't want to see. They don't care about us. For the first time, Michael Jackson was not just singing about love and unity. He was fighting back. The album was a success, but it also deepened the divide between those who supported him and those who saw him as a troubled, controversial figure. And soon the darkest chapter of his life was about to begin. Coming up next, the trial that destroyed him, the 2005 allegations. The 1993 accusations had nearly ruined him, but in 2005, Michael Jackson would face something even worse. A second child abuse trial that would last for months, a media circus that made his life unbearable. A verdict that would change everything. The trial that destroyed him. The 2005 allegations. By the early 2000s, Michael Jackson was no longer just a music icon, he was a man under siege. The 1993 allegations had left permanent scars on his reputation. The media had turned him into a constant target, fueling endless speculation about his personal life. His financial empire was crumbling under massive debts. But nothing could prepare him for what was about to happen next. In 2003, new allegations surfaced, leading to one of the most sensationalized trials in history. For 5 months, the world watched as Michael Jackson fought for his life, his legacy, and his freedom. By the time it was over, he would be a free man, but the damage would be irreversible. This is the story of the trial that changed everything. The second accusation, history repeats itself. In February 2003, British journalist Martin Bashir released a documentary called Living with Michael Jackson. It was supposed to be a behind-the-scenes look at Michael's life, but instead it became a disaster that led to his downfall. The interview that sparked the scandal. During the documentary, Michael admitted to sharing his bed with children, calling it an act of love and innocence. He insisted it was not sexual, but purely about kindness and comfort. He compared it to sleepovers between friends. He believed the world would understand his heart, but instead, the public was horrified. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Tabloids called him dangerous and sick. Psychologists warned that his behavior was inappropriate. Prosecutors saw an opportunity and they took it. Just months after the documentary aired, Michael Jackson was arrested. The charge? Child molestation. This time, the case would go to trial and Michael Jackson would face the fight of his life. The trial of the century. A media nightmare The People versus Michael Jackson trial began in 2005, and it became one of the most publicized legal battles in history. Michael faced 14 counts of criminal charges, including child molestation and conspiracy. Over 130 witnesses testified, including former employees, friends, and experts. The media turned the trial into a circus, covering every moment as if it were a reality show. The prosecution painted Michael as a manipulative predator. The defense argued that the accusations were a lie designed to extort money from him. The verdict found not guilty. On the 13th of June, 2005, after 4 months of trial and 32 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Michael Jackson was found not guilty on all charges. The world was in shock. His fans celebrated. His critics doubted the verdict. But Michael Jackson was free. However, winning the trial did not mean winning back his life, because the damage had already been done. The aftermath, a broken man, Michael had survived the legal battle, but he was never the same again. He felt betrayed by the media, who had turned his life into a spectacle. He became more reclusive, hiding from the public eye. His health deteriorated, and he became dependent on medication to deal with stress and anxiety. Worse, his financial empire was collapsing. Neverland Ranch was bleeding money. He was forced to sell off his music catalog just to stay afloat. He left the U.S., moving to Bahrain to escape the pressure. Michael Jackson had won the trial, but he had lost everything else. And as the years passed, his life continued to spiral downward. Coming up next, the final years, the comeback that never happened. By 2009, Michael was preparing for one last comeback. He announced a massive tour called This Is This Final Return to the Stage. He was determined to prove he was still the king of pop. But behind the scenes, he was battling exhaustion, anxiety, and a dangerous dependence on medication. And then, on the 25th of June, 2009, the world received the news that no one expected. Michael Jackson was gone forever. The final years, the comeback that never happened. By 2009, Michael Jackson was preparing for one last comeback. After years of scandal, legal battles, and financial struggles, he wanted to prove to the world that he was still the king of pop. He announced, "This is it," a massive 50-show residency in London. He promised his fans that this would be his final curtain call. He was ready to remind the world why he was the greatest performer of all time. But behind the scenes, Michael was struggling. Years of stress, medication, and isolation had taken their toll. And just weeks before his grand comeback, the world received the news that no one was prepared for. On the 25th of June, 2009, Michael Jackson was gone forever. This is the story of his tragic final days, the shocking details of his death, and the legacy he left behind. The build-up to This Is It, a return to glory. Michael's comeback was supposed to be his redemption arc. After years of scandals and financial ruin, he saw This Is It as his chance to reclaim his throne. He trained harder than ever, rehearsing for hours despite his frail condition. He surrounded himself with top choreographers, musicians, and dancers. He promised that This Is It would be his final and greatest tour. Fans rushed to buy tickets, and within hours, all 50 shows were sold out, a testament to his unmatched global influence. But while the world saw an artist making a triumphant return, the reality was much darker. Because Michael Jackson's body was breaking down, and he was barely holding himself together. The dark side of his final days, addiction and pressure. Michael was desperate to succeed, but he was also struggling physically and emotionally. He suffered from chronic insomnia, making it impossible for him to rest. His body was weakened by years of stress and prescription drug use. He was paranoid and anxious, worried about his ability to pull off the performances. To cope, he turned to Dr. Conrad Murray, a personal physician who prescribed him powerful medications. One of these drugs was propofol, a hospital-grade anesthetic that should only be used under strict medical supervision. But Michael relied on it just to sleep. And that deadly habit would be the final chapter in his story. The 25th of June, 2009, the day the world stood still. On the morning of the 25th of June, 2009, Michael Jackson was at his rented home in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. Dr. Conrad Murray administered propofol, as he had done many times before. Hours later, Michael was found unresponsive in his bed. 911 was called, but by the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. At 2:26 p.m., the King of Pop was pronounced dead. The news shocked the world. Fans flooded the streets, crying and holding vigils. Celebrities and world leaders paid tribute to his impact on music and culture. Social media and news outlets crashed due to the overwhelming response. Michael Jackson was gone, but his story was far from over. The investigation, was it murder? Immediately after his death, the world demanded answers. How could Michael Jackson, a man preparing for a massive comeback, suddenly die in his sleep? The autopsy revealed Michael's body was severely weakened, showing signs of malnutrition. Propofol and other sedatives were found in his system. His death was ruled as homicide due to medical negligence. Dr. Conrad Murray was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter. In 2011, he was found guilty and sentenced to 4 years in prison. But for Michael's fans, justice could never bring him back. The legacy of Michael Jackson. The king lives on even in death. Michael Jackson remains one of the most influential artists of all time. His music still inspires new generations of artists. His dance moves are studied, copied, and celebrated. His humanitarian work continues to impact millions around the world. Despite controversies and scandals, his art, talent, and cultural influence remain unmatched. Michael Jackson's legacy is eternal because legends never truly die. Final thoughts. The price of greatness. Michael Jackson wanted to be the greatest entertainer of all time. And he achieved that goal. But in the process, he sacrificed everything: his childhood, his health, his peace, and ultimately his life. His story is one of brilliance, pain, triumph, and tragedy. A reminder that greatness often comes with an unbearable price. And yet, decades after his passing, his music still plays, his influence still grows, and his legend still shines brighter than ever. Because there will never be another Michael Jackson. Long live the King of Pop. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Michael Jackson's life and legacy, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. Let us know in the comments, what is your favorite Michael Jackson song or memory? Until next time, keep the legend alive.